Facebook Live discussion here at First Person. I'm Mike Kelton, the host of Season 2 of First Person, and in light of the tragedies of Sunday morning, I've had a very difficult time dealing with what to put out there, what to do. But for me, the best thing that has helped has been talking to other human beings that are members of our community. And so I thought it would be important to do a Facebook Live discussion so we could all talk and create exposure and figure out a way to move forward. So I'd like to welcome two very special guests. We first have Tony Michael D'Agostino. Wanted to make sure, is this the grocery store?
No.
Okay.
No.
Because that was my first thought. So no affiliation with the grocery store, which is great for corporate people to be watching. No affiliation. Tony is an attorney and a PhD candidate in English literature at Fordham University, studying the Victorian novel, the American superhero comic book, which would be a great topic for another Facebook Live, and LGBTQ Cultures, which is why we're here today. Welcome.
Thank you.
Thanks. We're also joined by Faisal Alam, who is, since the age of 19, a queer Muslim advocate. Welcome, Faisal.
Thank you.
You're welcome. So I want to first start off so you guys can get to know these wonderful human beings who are with. Faisal, can you tell us a little bit about the work that you do for the queer Muslim community?
Sure. So I've been doing LGBT Muslim activism through speaking engagements and community organizing for about 15 years now. I'm on the steering committee of the Muslim Alliance for Sexual Gender Diversity, which is a national organization that supports and empowers LGBT Muslims and really looks at the intersections of all of the identities that we hold. It's one of the most diverse Muslims are one of the most diverse communities in the United States, and so we're sort of a microcosm of the Muslim world as well.
Wow, and speaking to that, with all that, that's a lot. And you've been working for a very long time with this community. This seems like the first time that this specific community has huge exposure. What was the reaction of the community when this happened?
Yeah, I think that, whenever there's a mass shooting or there's some kind of tragedy, I think Muslims around this country go into sort of a panic mode and a defensive posture mode. And it wasn't long until we found out that the person was identified as someone who identified as Muslim. And then on top of that, when we found out that it was a gay club, that obviously hit home for a lot of people. So people are still in shock. The media exposure has definitely brought a lot of hypervisibility to our communities. And so people are both elated about that and also really fearful because it just exposes, and now we're starting to see the right-wing Islamophobic attacks against our community as well that will also soon be coming from the queer community.
Yeah, this was supposed to be a later talk, but I think because we're already talking about it, I'd like to jump right in. The media coverage has been very much all over the place, and there's been a lot of things said that could be seen as appropriate or not appropriate. Are there any things that you guys have seen in the media that you've either been like, this is the way to handle it, or this is definitely not the way to expose this coverage?
I think you bring up a really good point about the way that the Orlando incident has sort of served like a political choose-your-own-adventure or an inkblot test, depending on the outlet or the talking head that is taking it on, right? So from the right, it becomes about terrorism and a sort of made-up Islamic boogeyman, and then from LGBTQ communities, we have sort of just another hate, like a hate crime on a new stupendous level, right? And then from Democrats, we have, about gun control. It becomes about gun control, right? And just seeing the way that every news cycle, it takes on a new form is both exhausting, but it's also, it makes you feel cynical, right? Like, how are you supposed to feel? How are we supposed to frame this issue? And that becomes very personal, right? How individual people, especially on social media, frame this issue becomes a reflection about their political and social and ethnic identity. And so it's creating a very sort of tense, but when you walk away from it from like 2 seconds at a time, like interesting.
Very tense.
Weird. Yeah.
I know that it seems like our community is very much on edge with what we're seeing in the media. I have dealt with stuff personally where I've questioned if what someone said was offensive because it made me feel a certain way, and then I went and said, am I okay to feel that way? Is that okay to feel that way? So Faisal, can you speak a little bit about how your reaction has been to what you've seen in the media?
Yeah, I mean, I think as queer communities, like, we're always on edge, right? Like, there's inherently a fear to walk in the world as an LGBT person. At least that's how I feel. And then,
I'm with,
you know,
I'm with you. Yeah, it's
so,
scary. It's
I
scary.
mean, even now we have marriage equality, we have, you know, Don't Ask, Don't Tell abolished. Like, there's still, hate crimes are still really, really high amongst LGBT communities. And so when something like this, at the level that it happens, I think it brings up all of this trauma that is inherent, I think, within our community. And that's what we're sitting with. And so, you know, I think there's a legitimate, and a lot of straight folks, straight friends are not really getting that, I think. Like, that's where my sort of frustration has been around what you're describing, is like, you just don't understand why this has impacted us the way that it does, and it's not going to take a week or a month for us to get over it.
Yeah, that reminds me of, as a queer community, we are the one minority community where we have to come to terms with who we are in a community that might not support us, be honest enough to then tell our close friends and eventually a larger group of people. And then once we decide that we are at a place where we want to be honest in light of being hated, it makes us a very powerful group of people. But in that group of minority, there are other minorities. Yeah. And so it's if anything, the best thing I think, which is why we're doing this, is exposure and hearing this. So my question for you, Faisal, was someone like my dad, who's a smart, great guy. I love him to death. He's very accepting. He makes mistakes a lot. I don't know if my dad's watching, but he makes mistakes a lot in the way that he phrases things. So what's some advice you can give to a lot of people in the straight community that do want to help? What's some like phrasing or terminology or ways that they can approach it to help?
Yeah, I think we need to assume best intentions. So with your dad, you know that he's an open person, he's smart, he's intelligent. So ask questions, be honest with the fact that you don't know something, don't make assumptions about, terminologies or people or people's ethnicities, and be willing to do the research, like be willing to do the work and not have us educate you on all the time, because that also becomes exhausting, right? Like for me to keep on talking about my race, my ethnicity, and why I identify as gay and Muslim, and oh my God, is that possible? Like really, like we're really beyond that conversation now.
Right.
And so like go out and just Google something and
so the advice is really like just Google something. Like,
right.
Don't be uneducated.
But actually, no, I am also wary of the dangers of Googling, right? And the dangers of tapping into the news outlet that already feeds you your own prejudices. Just in this, of course, I'm in the spirit of good intentions, but perhaps not all the time. But I think that when you're talking about the mistakes, right? Or like in light of notwithstanding good intentions, I think that there's a lot of strategic ignorance that's going on around the Orlando incident. Like, so for instance, in the House of Representatives, you have Representative Sessions telling media outlets that Pulse wasn't really much of a gay club. It was mostly Latinos, and that's how we have to frame it, right? And then you have maybe certain other news outlets framing the incident as a violence against American values and violence against humanity, right? And here, these mistakes, conveniently enough, like erase like the investments of the LGBT community, the fact that they were targeted, right? So good intent. I'm sure we all have those good intentioned family members, but the thing is, those good intentioned family members are listening to Sessions and they're listening to Fox News, right? And they're unknowingly participating in this fantasy that homophobia really, it's not a problem, and our identities are not at stake. Our identity and our safety isn't at stake as LGBTQ people, right? And then there's the issue of, like you brought up, is about the safety of intersectional and racial and ethnic minorities within the LGBTQ community, that within the community we have to handle. There's so many issues on so many fronts that Orlando is bringing up all at once, and it's exhausting, it's dizzying, right?
With that, so I think that is wonderful. I feel like you hit the chord there with the education and the people just not understanding what it's really like to be a member of our community. For instance, I think we've come a long way, and I think people are saying, especially if you live in New York, people are like, oh, it's not a big deal. I don't care if you're gay. I love gay people. One, like, that's a little bit offensive. But recently, 2 years ago, with my ex, we were walking in Virginia. He was in a Broadway touring production, and we were holding hands. And a car pulled up next to us, a group of like 4 teenagers. Right. They opened their windows and they screamed, "Stop holding hands." Can I say, yeah, a
Go
faggot.
ahead.
Yeah.
Go ahead, yeah.
They said that word, which sucks, but we heard it and it was yelled at us. It was very aggressive. And I stopped holding Jesse's hand, and I was like, it's okay. Like, I don't want to start anything. I don't want to fight people. I'm a bad fighter. I'm a lover. I'm not a fighter. And he goes, no, we should hold hands. Like, this is important. Yes. And yes, but I was so scared in that moment. Given I came out when I was 15, I love myself. I'm the gayest one I know. I love being gay, and I am so proud to be gay. But with that, I still faced prejudice. It still exists. And I think this incident is bringing that up, and people are being reminded that they have felt fearful to be themselves in public.
But of course, and the ongoing sense of danger that we've all acknowledged, and not to be too academic, but I think that this reminds me of George Chauncey's Gay New York, right, which is like a canonical piece of gay and LGBTQ history, right, and he talks about gay communities in New York before the homosexual identity comes up, right? And his conclusion is that you live in a society where you are under a progressive illusion, right, or a progressive fantasy that things are getting better. No, I'm sorry, Dan Savage. Okay, like don't come for me. Okay, that things are always getting progressively better, but that's not necessarily true. At any moment, things can shift back 3 steps, and you will be exactly where you were before marriage equality. All it takes is one rock, one opening of a window, and calling you a faggot. I love being a faggot, by the way, just so you know.
Hell yeah, love it.
And then, but also, and I think that what's interesting is that maybe it's not so academic, because Barack Obama, addressing the issue, he brought it up. That we have to be vigilant. We can't assume that homophobia just like poofs away. And also I really want to keep the pressure on our legislative body, right? Also in the House of Representatives last week, Rick Allen, before a vote, spits out a Bible verse calling for the death of homosexuals, like the killing of homosexuals.
Isn't that scary?
Yeah, so the opposition of the right and the Christian right calling about like essentially like I wanted like a homonational Islamophobic menace, right? Is contradictory, right? You say it, right? And then Omar Martin did it, right? And there has to be some responsibility there, and we have to be conscious of the fact that the progressive fantasy is not true.
So how do we do that? That's my question. I agree with you.
Ugh.
How, like, besides this conversation, which I think is hopefully helpful for the viewers out there, also if you're watching and you have any questions, type them into the comments, and we'll do our best to answer them. Also share this conversation. I feel like this is really important. I'm learning a lot, so I'm glad we're here. But my question for you guys is, how do we create that change?
Yeah, I mean, if this moment can bring anything, is that impetus, really, that it propels communities to work in solidarity with one another. You know, I think we've really just been in these identity, like we've been hiding behind identities for a really long time. And this club, being that it was a queer club, being that it was Latin night, like it brings up, the issues that Tony is talking about. It brings up issues of the fact that most, if not all of those people that were killed, their parents were probably undocumented, from Puerto Rico and Mexico. Like, they dealt with the system of being undocumented immigrants in this country that are dealing with, the institutions that are working against them. So, like, we have to go beyond the fact that this was a killing in a gay bar. Like, what are some of the issues underneath behind these people's lives also that they were dealing with? And then how can LGBT people work in coalition and solidarity with other marginalized communities? And that's really the crux of it.
We have some questions, but I want to just first button this because I think that is very helpful. And I think there's all this stuff that came out in the past couple days about the killer being gay himself, being on Grindr, and there, I'll pose the question to stay a little bit neutral, but how do you think that played a role, or society could have played a role into him feeling those things, into the tragedy happening.
Yeah, I mean, look, we're never going to know what happened and why he did it, right? We know that he has been married twice. He was, domestic violence. I mean, he had access to guns. He was a security guard. He was trained to be a fighter with assault weapons. Like, that's a fact, right? And so, yes, he lives in a homophobic culture. The United States is not necessarily the most welcoming country for queer people. We live in New York and maybe in LA and California, but that's about it, right? And so it's all of those factors. And I mean, how many Mormons and evangelical Christians have dealt with internalized homophobia? They're not going out and shooting up a gay bar, right? And so that's why I think we have to be careful when it comes to this. Yes, I'm sure there was like repression that had a lot to do with it, but there were all these other factors that were also happening.
And I think changing those factors would probably be the best way to move forward.
Exactly.
Or at least trying to change those factors. No?
Well, it's almost like it's too easy to say, but then how do you implement that? How do you make a culture less homophobic, right? I feel like that gender and sexuality, like these politics, I mean, does this sound too Camille Paglia? But they're such deep structures. Like, how do we even touch them? Right? Like, we can legislate, we can educate, but even those things only come to fruition culturally, psychologically, and spiritually 2 generations later, right? Yeah. I think that what's interesting is the way that the LGBT community and Democrats, but we're talking centrist Democrats, have sort of instantly coagulated around gun control, right? And that's something discrete. It's something material. It's something that we can attack right now. Other than homophobia, we haven't even talked about the internalized homophobia and the way that it remixes with toxic masculinity, right? Which puts Omar Mateen in line with Elliot Rodger and Dylan Roof, all who had issues with women, right? All who had issues with their own masculinity, right? That this is not just a Muslim thing. There's a part, if you look at it right, if you squint your eyes a little bit, it's not even terrorism. It's just another American mass shooting, which is not to say that there isn't an element of terror, right? But it's where you put the emphasis. He's a lot more, he's very homegrown American. And that is also what's shocking.
And his issues are from growing up a homosexual in America.
In America, as well as in a Muslim family. And so how you tease and how you make your own you make your own representation. Your own narrative becomes a reflection on you.
Totally.
Right?
I want to get back to this, but I just want to, so the viewers watching are having some questions, which keep them coming, and I want to get to this quickly. Sheldon's asked, the trans were performing at Pulse. Trans, I guess there were trans performers performing at Pulse, but you won't hear a thing. There's no equality
of representation.
Right.
I mean, which mainstream music outlets have had queer Latinx, voices on TV? I mean, I was on MSNBC on Sunday night, and for 2 hours sitting there in the green room watching one white man after the other talk about why this happened. I mean, so we have to center the victims. We have to center the voices that were actually affected by this. And as Tony has mentioned, like this tragedy is being used as an opportunity by all sorts of people to co-opt the tragedy and make it about themselves.
True. As a white gay man that grew up in upper middle class America, I struggle with being and even saying I struggle sounds, I feel like a crazy person, but I struggle with if my pain is valid given the pain of others and the fact that it might be, there's so much more turmoil there. And it's something that I struggle with, honestly.
Sure.
And I can say that I do struggle with that, and it's something worth talking about.
And that's new, right? You probably weren't able to do that before if something like this would have happened. No. And so your struggle is valid and your pain is valid too. And